Hey, welcome to the exchange. We're in now day 6, day 7 in this Ukraine war. Let's look at what the in-game possibilities are and how it affects U.S. and global investors. Hey, so let's look at this real fast as an investor and the kind of the first tab I want to look at. So if you really ask yourself, hey, if war was going to end in a week, how would you invest? And that's really the way to think about it right now, because this war is, I don't think it's going to last that long. It's because Russian supplies, Russian, overall supply chain and Russian forces overall, I mean, they're running out of steam. Ukrainians are basically holding their own right now. But if you ask yourself, hey, the U.S. market sanctions have hit pretty hard. Russian economy, U.S. and NATO kind of forces and the NATO economies, they have not hit that hard. When we've seen this massive basically drawdown, and that's why you're really seeing the Dow and Nasdaq not be hit that hard yet. The big fear, obviously, is energy sanctions coming on board, either proactively or reactively from Putin or from NATO enforcing them proactively. But again, we haven't seen that quite yet. So this is one of those things where you have to ask yourself, hey, this might be a time to go risk on, maybe even buy those option contracts, because in the near term, this near term is in like 1 month from now. I mean, it could be a whole different economy. We might have that like long post-Omicron and post-Ukrainian war kind of rally going forward. So this is the same map I pulled up in past videos. This is from New York Times. This is basically the current disposition of troops of the Russian invasion, what's going on. This is as of, I think, 11:30 East Coast time on Tuesday. But really what you see here is you see really the three main fronts. It's been quiet in Donbass region, but really you have this big front, I mean, heading towards Kiev. They really hear about this, like this article about this 40-mile convoy, which that 40-mile convoy goes from Horstamel Airport, which is about right here, all the way up to the north time frame. It's about 20 kilometers, maybe 25 kilometers away from Kiev right now. And really what they're doing is pushing to the west of Kiev to cut off the actual resupply from both Poland and Romania to the west. So the idea is they not surround Kiev entirely and proper, but they might actually cut off this main supply roads, main supply chains of NATO and U.S. Basically rearmament and resupply. You also see this is a lot of data now. You see it's northeastern push too. They're actually a lot closer now. They're almost in the eastern suburbs of Kiev right now. Again, the southern routes are still quite open, so if they wanted to escape, they could escape to the south. But their goal, I mean, this is what President Zelensky's put at, is he's saying, hey, we're going to hold in, we're going to fight, we're going to keep fighting. Kharkiv under heavy shelling right here. It's almost been entirely surrounded, basically from this like northeastern approach from Russia right now. Donbass region, almost no change there. It's been pretty quiet. The lines haven't moved that much. They pushed a little bit further towards Mariupol, and so what you see here is the Crimean kind of front right there has pushed to the northeast and actually linked up with the actual Donbass forces. So we're not quite sure what's going on right here in Mariupol right now, but we believe it's surrounded. They've lost power. They might be in street-to-street fightings, but that's, we'll see what happens with that. But it's definitely getting pretty bad over. But that's the overall layout right now. Another question is what happens next? What's the actual end game? What's the actual output potentially for Vladimir Putin as well as the Ukrainian army? So looking at the Russian army perspective first, what you have here is really three main scenarios they could possibly do. So option number one is obviously conquer the entire country from the east to the west. Honestly, that's not going to happen. They don't have the forces to do that. I mean, roughly 200,000 troops right now, which are all mostly engaged and already deployed, including probably about 30,000 Belarusian forces as well too. And like the country itself, I mean, is massive. So the idea of them, seizing all the way to the west over in Liev it's not going to happen. It's unlikely. Another scenario potentially too is having them push from Kharkiv and surround Kiev and push basically to the Dampier River, which basically splits the country in half right there. That's a possibility, but it takes time though too. That's one thing Putin is actually going against right now, because this war is getting more and more well known in Russia. He's running out of time economically to actually have his decisive victory, decisive engagement potentially to basically win this war on the propaganda cycle. And the third scenario right here we're looking at potentially is he invades Kiev. They bomb the crap out of it. He bombs Kharkiv. He maybe makes a run for Odessa in the southwest there, and basically from there he retrogrades his forces back to the actual eastern half of the country, over to the Donetsk and Luhansk and the Donbass region, and basically from there calls it like, hey, decisive war. They've made their point. They've had their efforts forward, and he basically withdraws his forces back to Russia or back to Belarus, and then from there they may not actually have a full change of control of government. That's a possibility too. It's not a good one for Putin though, but it might happen. Potentially if he can't seize his major objectives, but we'll see what happens with this. Now, from the Ukrainian army side, it's a whole different story. So their whole goal right here is to really buy time, seize time. They know time's on their side. Because Russia, I mean, seeing far in the Russian army, they're out of supplies. They're running very low on ammunition, water, gas, etc. I mean, you've seen abandoned vehicles all over the news. It's not they've been destroyed; they've just been abandoned because either broken down, or they've ran out of fuel, or soldiers just surrendered in general. So they know, hey, time's on their side. The war, I guess, morale war is on their side too, and they know, hey, Putin's running out of time. If he's going to actually seize his big victory and actually have his big conquering, he needs to do it in the next 3-4 days at most, because he knows, hey, public sentiment's going to turn against him, oligarchs turn against him, the longer sanctions go on and on. So this war, I mean, for better or worse, it's going to end pretty soon. I think the Ukrainians and the Russians both know that, and this is really the final push you're seeing around Kiev. So really the idea is here, hey, why aren't they actually, bombing this 40-mile long convoy? Why aren't they doing it yet? And really the answer there is they're bringing it in closer to Kiev. The Kiev to the actual Belarus border, it's almost 100 kilometers or so. It's a ways out there. So what they're doing is they're bringing them into prepared kill zones around and inside Kiev itself. So basically they can have, people in place, they can have forces in place with the right equipment, right ammunition, etc. around those, obstacles to actually basically degrade this entire Russian assault. Now, for the Belarusian forces, it's a little bit different. They're pushing on the eastern half of the Dnieper River, on the eastern half towards Kiev. Again, it's not that many troops. They're not as equipped as the Russians. So, I mean, it's almost a worse Russian army in a way, underfunded, undertrained, etc. So, I mean, the effects there, what they're trying to do, they're trying to push the east of Kiev and hold forces east of Kiev. That way, the western side where the actual Russians are at is not as well contested as they can't take an entire force for the Ukrainians and put it on the western half of the city potentially and hold them off there. But that's kind of the plan right now. We'll see if it's going to work or not. Honestly, I think Kiev will hold. Now, this is barring any kind of chemical weapon attacks or obviously a nuclear strike on Kiev itself. But I mean, conventional warfare, I think the Ukrainians are in a good spot to at least buy time, buy a few days, if not a week or more potentially, before they could potentially lose Kiev. And remember, Kiev's a massive city. 3 million people basically live in Kiev in peacetime right there. I mean, it's massive structure. So the idea of wiping it out, bombing it to oblivion or whatever. I mean, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of structures there. So I mean, it would take weeks potentially for Russian army to actually level Kiev from both artillery and from air force. So it's just not going to happen in any kind of short period of time. And the Ukrainians know that, and they know, hey, time's on their side potentially if they can hold out long enough. This is from Lukashenko. He briefed this on Tuesday. And basically all it is basically a military briefing in Moscow. And he's briefing this crazy plan he has where the Belarusian Russian army is going to come in and seize the entire country of Ukraine, potentially pushing the Moldova as well, which is a totally separate country. I mean, it's just this crazy sense here. But really the funny part is looking at the actual staff themselves, those guys on the table, and actually looking at their faces. I mean, they look absolutely just like, what is going on? Is this real life? Is this actually happening? I mean, I'm going to pause real fast. You look at the guys, so this generals left and right, and they just look like, what am I doing here? What's going on in my life? And this is all political theater, and they kind of know that too, and that's why you really see this. I mean, this is one of those ideas where, I mean, political theater in overall in Russia, I mean, it is a thing, and that's why he gets this it's attachment from reality of actual, what's going on the ground, what's real life, what's actually happening out there, what's actually going on behind the scenes for this kind of political soap opera we're watching overall. And that's a big fear. You look at Putin, is hey, is he getting the right intel? Is he actually a rational actor, or is he getting fed a bunch of BS where all of a sudden he's going to assume hey, the war is won and we're not telling, he's not being told the truth actually, and he might launch either further strikes or potentially a nuclear strike if he feels he has the advantage, which that's the big fear there. But I thought a funny video with Lukashenko. Is a total idiot, but it was pretty funny. Now, obviously, look at today. You see the crude oil market. I mean, it's just absolutely spiked. It's just this massive spike overall, and hitting it roughly 106 for April contracts. I mean, this is a large spike, and really the bull case, kind of you see, if there's a full sanctions or Putin cuts off oil preemptively to Europe itself. Really, you see oil go to about 120, 125, maybe 130. But then again, hey, if fear happens and people get really panicky, it might go to 140, 150 potentially too. But this is really showing you, I mean, this really spike, all it's saying is hey, the Russian army, this war's dragging out. The Russian army's had horrible basically results on the battlefield. And then sanctions are hitting pretty hard too. So really the idea there is, hey, Putin might actually preemptively sanction through oil and natural gas, basically all of Europe and or the U.S. too. And then really the idea is, hey, if we lose the oil supplies, it'll drive the oil prices up, obviously. And you got to remember too, Russia is basically exports about 45% of its energy to actual NATO-aligned countries there too. I mean, this is not a blind threat. But really the question is, why hasn't he done it yet? Why has he waited this long? I mean, sanctions hit over the weekend. I mean, it's been a while. Why hasn't he cut it off preemptively? And really, there's two scenarios there. Scenario one is, A, he doesn't want to, because Russian oil and natural gas revenue basically accounts for 40% of the Russian basically federal funds. So basically, their funding for their government itself is 40% petro-funded. So it's the idea there is if he cuts it off, loses that entire funding stream. So this is the last thing I want to show you on the energy side. So this is from energy.gov. This came out on Tuesday. They're releasing 60 million barrels of oil from strategic reserves. So basically, the U.S. is doing about half that. So doing about 30 million barrels of reserves. So roughly, it's about 4, 5, 6% somewhere in there. So we're about 600 million barrels of actual of reserves. So this is not this 30 million is not a massive number, but this will be the first wave potentially. And you got to remember too, I did this in a past video. So this is actually roughly accounts for 11 million barrels per day of of crude oil, basically production. So about half that gets cut off. So assume there are 5 million barrels. So I mean that's basically the lost crude right there. So this is basically 6 days worth of from the U.S. side of basically crude supply lost in the market if Russian sanctions or if Russian pulls the plug on their crude oil production. But yeah, this is a good first step, and it shows, hey, Biden is doing something going forward. I mean, this is going to happen in the future to kind of settle the markets down a little bit too. The big fear, though, is Middle Eastern supplies are pretty tight. I mean, there's not much actual excess capacity left to actually produce more. Potentially an Iranian deal happens where they put an extra 1 million barrels in the supply, but again, we'll see what happens with that. It's going to be a tough, potentially tough month, and especially the longer this war drags out potentially too. But I think personally, I mean, next few days, this might be done, or more or less done from a tactical perspective. Hey, so to wrap this up, really in summary, so roughly this is really the final push of the Russian and kind of the Russian advance. If this 40-mile long convoy and this final Belarusian push, if it fails, I think Putin's done. He either has to withdraw his forces entirely or withdraw the Donbass region, basically reset his forces. I mean, which that could take weeks potentially. And at that point, the war will be over. But I mean, every day that passes, sanctions hit harder and harder. And there's new sanctions coming on board almost every day, though. So he knows, hey, he has to do it now because I see, a week or two, those protests we're seeing in downtown Moscow, it might turn violent potentially too. And that's his really big fear. Or his oligarchs turn against him though too. That's another big fear he has. But I think Putin knows he has to get a decisive victory soon or make a choice fast. Otherwise, he may not be the actual president much longer, either violently or peacefully transfer power. Again, the big fear, though, right now is just these tactical nukes or nuclear weapons in general. I mean, Russia has thousands of them so far. So the question is, hey, what's going to happen? Will Putin go crazy? Will he launch a nuke or launch a chemical weapon attack on somebody? That's the big fear they have right there. I mean, he's I guess, bluffed in a way so far. He said, hey, he put his nuclear forces on high alert so far, but we haven't seen those changes in both his bombers or submarines or anything else, too. Everything's basically going as normal. So that was mostly rhetoric. But then again, I mean, the man might be crazy. But again, we'll see with that. But I think, honestly, next 3 or 4 days, even by Friday, we'll have a decisive, basically, outcome. Or either be a stalled advance or potentially Ukrainian counterattack. Or Putin might announce, hey, this war is over because the Russian people just can't sustain it for much longer. Hey, definitely let me know your thoughts on this. This is a very dynamic situation going forward. I mean, there's multiple pathways, some pretty good, some absolutely awful. Definitely like the channel overall. Hit subscribe down below. It's a pretty new channel, about a month older so far, so really kind of getting started and really enjoying it. But yeah, that's the exchange. Over and out.